So you have an RV that you're looking to renovate?
We can help you out with this RV Renovation
101.
Hi, I'm April Look.
And I'm Derek Look.
And we are the RV renovators and owners at New Look RV Renovation. So a little bit about us and how we got into RV renovation.
How did we get into this whole thing?
We ran a photography business for 16 years. Then the pandemic hit and we were forced to close our studio. At first, we hunkered down and spent time together as a family. Then we bought this RV and we got to work. We had renovated 2 previous RVs for ourselves and had sold them. So we used that background and this time approached the renovation as a business and a way of moving forward in such uncertain times. Sometimes the best ideas are born from a sunset and a bottle of wine.
We started with a pop-up camper that we renovated for ourselves, and we took our family camping and we upgraded that to a travel trailer, which we took all the way out to Yellowstone one summer. And then I guess I decided to list both of those and they sold just like that.
Yeah, and we were like, maybe we're on to something and we should renovate RVs and sell them, but kind of had that in the back of our minds, I guess you could say. We had planned on buying another travel trailer for our family the following summer, which would have been 2020, and as we all know, the pandemic hit.
Yeah, so any chances of going traveling that year were pretty much off for us at least, and so our other business, which is a photography and video studio, also had the brakes put on it because of pandemic reasons. And so we had to get creative on how we were going to keep the lights on, essentially. And so we found an RV that fit the bill of what we were looking for, renovation-wise, and we purchased it and we got to work.
Yeah, and it was great. It gave us some purpose and things to do during that time when work was slow for us. We had a lot of fun renovating that together, and then listed it and sold it maybe that night, I think, right?
Yeah, it was crazy, and it feels like a whirlwind, and now here we are basically a couple years later. This is still a full-time business for us. We're still doing photography and video, but we're spending a lot of our time here renovating, and we're actually in our latest renovation right now. This is a 5th wheel that we did for a client. They're picking it up tomorrow, and it's traveling from where we're at in Wisconsin all the way to California, but things are done, it's all finished up, and it's exciting because this is a crazy part of the project.
Yeah, it's a really fun thing to watch a renovation from start to finish and see your dreams kind of become a reality. And so what we're going to do is kind of walk you through our process, whether you're renovating an RV for yourself or you're renovating an RV to sell, and just kind of walk you through our steps and our process. And we're calling this RV Renovation 101.
So first things first, you got to find an RV. So maybe you already own one and you're just looking to kind of fix it up or give it a new style. Otherwise, you need to go on the search for one. And so either way, that's obviously step number 1 to secure that RV. And I guess just a side note, if you are looking to purchase an RV yet, we would recommend being very particular about the RVs that you choose. If you already own it, you obviously don't have that choice at this point, but we personally try to stay away from any kind of water damage that's possible. And that's personal choice. I know there's a lot of renovators who go full steam into that, but we had a less than fun experience with
flashback to that happening.
Black mold, and so the subfloor is going to need replaced, the wall is going to need taken out and checked out and replaced in parts, and then obviously we're going to need to seal up wherever it's leaking from. You can see that trail right there, and just dripping, soaking, wicking into that little crack, and it caused all that damage on the inside. Just that little space. Opening the wall on the inside revealed a few more leaks around the window and another one by the floor. Some wall studs needed replaced, as well as the entire subfloor. And erected what they call stilts. These are pieces of wood that are go down to the ground, and they hold the slide up. And the reason you have these is in case you gotta pull the slide. Keep in mind that they don't sell plywood the size of a super slide floor. Look at how bad these old panels were. They're completely dry rotted, ruined. The water damage on this panel actually came from the window and went down to the floor. Well, that lets in a whole lot more light We got it all replaced and repaired. It ended up being better than new and beautiful, but water damage is definitely a headache we'd like to avoid in the future. And so because of experience like that, it's just something that if we can avoid it, we try to stay away from it. So we work primarily on RVs that are either really, really new or have been super well taken care of.
And that's not to say that you can't find older RVs that are great and that someone, you know, stored in a garage and maintained their seals and took really good care of, because there are definitely those out there as well.
And a lot of this actually pertains to your geography and your weather. So for us, we have really hot summers, we have really cold winters, and it oftentimes can be really wet in between. Mm-hmm. And I know that, you know, if you're in the south, it might be completely different. Or, you know, if you're in a dry climate as opposed to the Pacific Northwest, you're going to have totally different situations with moisture. But for us, moisture is a real concern, and it's something that, you know, we make sure, like I said, we take a really close look at the rigs that we're inspecting. We use a moisture meter. We look at all kind of the usual suspects as far as the points where a weakness generally occurs in RVs, and we just try to find one that is pretty rock solid.
How about we talk a little bit about how you inspect an RV?
Right, and this could apply obviously to if you already own one as well, because you want to identify if there are any trouble spots that you might need to further investigate. So we usually take a walk around the perimeter and just check out if there's anything noticeable. You know, anything from like cracked seals to you can tell that somebody really did some sort of patch job in an area. Mm-hmm. If there's slides, we like to take a look underneath the slides and see if that subfloor is noticeably soft.
Right.
If you can get on the roof, I mean, you want to check the roof out. You can usually tell if those seals have been maintained or if they're the original ones from like 10 years ago and they're all cracked and you can see openings in them where obviously water can get into. So that's kind of the main things. You check the trailer for rust. For us at least in the north, and those are kind of the main outside things. And then when you get inside, usually what we'll do is kind of go around the perimeter, so anything where the wall touches the ceiling, inside the cabinets, where the walls meet the floor, you just want to check all those spots both physically with your hands, and then if you have a moisture meter, if you don't, we recommend getting one, but it's just a little thing that looks like a stud finder. You run it along and it'll give you a readout as far as if there's moisture present or not. And so you're just looking for spots where either water's running down the walls or it's you know, coming in on the floor or the ceiling, and just make sure that those areas aren't soft and that they're not actively wet.
Yeah. For us, what we have found is that water can be a nightmare in an RV. So we personally steer clear.
And just to put it into perspective too, we walk away from probably 9 out of 10 of the RVs that we inspect. Because
yeah, that's very true.
It's so common for there, at least here in Wisconsin, for there to be water issues with those RVs. So we're saying no far more than we're ever saying yes. And again, it's just to avoid that nightmare situation that, you know, we personally went through and we've seen other people go through. So
you can kind of read the people too in the situation. We went to look at a pop-up once, and if you're familiar with pop-ups, they like crank up and down. And the gentleman that was showing us the pop-up wasn't willing to put the pop-up up for us, right?
Yeah, he was very stern about it.
Yeah.
And didn't want us to touch any of those mechanisms. So
it's kind of a red flag that perhaps something was wrong with the pop-up. We've also looked at plenty of RVs that, you know, they're like blatantly trying to hide things by placing things over water damage.
And the sad thing is you can't just trust an RV because it's at a dealership.
Yeah.
I guarantee that there's quality dealerships out there that aren't trying to pull one over on people, but we've been at some of the biggest dealerships in the country, and literally there's been active water damage. When I say active water damage, the walls sopping wet. I put my finger through the walls. That's how wet they've been. And so these are RVs. They're on a lot at a reputable dealership, and they're for sale. And when you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know what you're looking at, people will just purchase them. And besides it being a danger for the RV falling apart, it can be a health issue, because then you start talking about mold growing and mildew in the wall and getting spores, you know, in the RV. It's already a small area that you're sleeping in, you know, potentially with your family. And so any of those air pollutants and toxins, you want to stay away from that as much as possible. So that's our spiel on water damage.
Inspecting All right, let's get to the fun stuff, shall we?
So where do we start? So you have your RV, you got it home.
And you've decided you're going to renovate it.
So what do you do?
Step would be definitely to decide what your budget is. And maybe budget kind of goes along with designing out what you want to do. And for us, design is kind of a two-person process. As far as we walk through the RV and come up with ideas for things that we definitely want to demo out and take out of the RV, what we might want to build and put in there. And then from there, generally, I guess I probably decide more so like the finishing design details and come up with a mood board or a design board.
And you got to decide between the things you want to change aesthetically and the things you want to change for functionality purposes. So do you need an office space, or do the kids need a certain area to do something in? Do you want to revamp a booth area because it doesn't fit everybody that needs to fit? So there's those things, and it's trying to balance both those worlds together. And so you got to kind of try to envision that as much as possible. And I mean, where do you suggest people pull inspiration from?
So I personally am pulling inspiration from like magazines and stores, walking through and seeing like the setups at the stores, and books, websites, the internet, Instagram. You can just kind of like pull ideas and inspiration from all around you. Of course, you probably are going to first start by deciding your genre or design style, like if you want to do your design more like farmhouse or modern, and you can kind of just go from there.
And the first move for a lot of people is to just go lighter with everything, because in general, most RVs that come out of the factory, especially ones that haven't been created in recent years, are very brown and dark and dreary.
Yes.
And so that's usually the first move, is to figure out how you might brighten up that space. And so, like April said, she'll do a lot of hard work with research on the back end, finding things that she thinks are pretty. She'll put together mood boards or design boards that kind of lay out, pieces that we want to incorporate with different design features. And then it's a matter of just walking through the unit and figuring out, where it makes sense to do those things and what kind of space you have to work with.
Yeah, and so you need to take a lot of measurements as well. That's probably actually like an early step for us, is that we go through and measure everything, because it can be totally useless that I'm shopping and picking out this cute bench that's going to go in the RV and then it doesn't fit. That was just a waste of time. So instead, we have all the measurements and we have them saved in Notes, the Note app, and then I'm able to just like easily reference those as I'm shopping. And then with like the whole design process too comes building. And so a lot of times I'll be like, oh, a banquette would look cute here, Derek, is this possible? And then you kind of let me know if it's possible.
Well, and every RV is a little bit different as far as dimensions and space and that sort of thing. So there's no like standard spot. So just because a piece of furniture works in one RV that we've done doesn't mean that's going to work in the next one.
Yeah, I feel like often we have people writing us asking for plans for furniture that we've built. And I mean, that can just be tough, because just because this banquette here worked here, it wouldn't have worked in the last RV that we renovated, or, vice versa. A table we put there might not work here. And so it truly is custom furniture that you're building. You're a custom furniture builder.
Who would have thought? So space. So you really got to get a handle on the spatialness of everything, and maybe that means you got to get templates involved. Maybe you have to have a cardboard cutout of how big the couches you're thinking of putting in, or this or that. You
can use painter's tape to paint out or to tape out areas.
Yeah, so just doing things like that so you have an understanding of what'll fit and what might not fit. And then, like, really another big point that we would want to hit home is through this entire process, you want to really be thinking about the amount of weight that you're putting in and taking out of the RV. And hopefully, in a perfect world, you're keeping those pretty well in balance.
Yeah, that is so important, largely due to safety.
Yeah, if your trailer, might be balanced or configured a certain way to be pulled, and if all of a sudden you're distributing that weight in an entirely different manner in the trailer, it might not pull straight. It's also the trailer itself is built to hold a certain amount of weight, and so you go over that, and it's not like you can go over it by 10 pounds or whatever, but if you go over it by a significant amount, you're just putting more stress on the tires, on the axles, and you're asking for some sort of problem down the road.
Yeah, and more stress on your tow vehicle as well.
Exactly. So keeping weight in mind is huge, and a lot of residential items are heavy, and they don't really worry about it because it doesn't generally matter how much weight you put in your home. So you really need to check that parameter too. How much does this weigh? And then, consider that as you're making purchases and planning for what you're going to do. And again, there's not like a magic answer for that, but you just need to be cognizant of how much weight you're taking out of a certain space and how much weight you're either adding or eliminating from that space. So it's a bit of a math equation all the way along.
I think like a large part of design comes down to function as well. Just because something is pretty, you want to make sure that it also like functions well for you and your family. So again, maybe this current fifth wheel that we just renovated is great for the couple that we renovated it for. But maybe someone else has 3 dogs and 4 kids, and this RV with a white couch and stuff isn't quite as practical. So you kind of have to walk yourself through what's going to make sense for your family as well when it comes down to design.
Mm-hmm. And balancing real life with what you might see on social media. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some give and some take there.
Yeah, so now you've come up with a design, and now it's time to really get down to the nitty gritty. And when I say nitty gritty, I mean demo.
A demo day. Of course, that's exciting for our kids.
It's today, demo day.
Demo day.
Demo day. Demo day.
That's when you get to come in and you literally take out everything that, for sure, that you don't want. You're definitely going to be getting rid of, generally a lot of window treatments and maybe some cabinetry and old pieces of furniture and things like that. They might, unfortunately, have to go to the dump, but we try to upcycle as much as possible. So whether we're reusing it or we're taking it to a place like Restore, hopefully a lot of that gets put back into use. And then if the items are really new and in good shape, we actually oftentimes either give them away or sell them on Marketplace. And somebody else who has an RV that just literally wants to replace their booth or something and wants to keep it factory, they can get a brand new booth and replace that with it. So I think that's an important thing to think about. But so you're going to go in and you're going to take out everything that you don't want in the RV, and then you want to carefully remove as much as possible the things that you might even still be planning on keeping in the final renovation, because you got to clear out as much as possible to make room for paint prep and painting and all of that sort of process.
Let's kind of walk people through. So I feel like we get a lot of questions on how to remove like upper cabinets and things, and those can be secured and they're kind of tricky.
So in a perfect world, you're not going to keep those upper cabinets because sometimes there's just not like a real non-destructive way to get at some of those screws. You might have to end up replacing like a piece of paneling or something when you put them back together. But yes, there's always screws hidden. There'll be like 2 pieces of plywood that are kind of sandwiched together over like a small like 1x1 frame or something that makes up the bottom and sometimes the sides or even the top. And generally there's screws hidden inside of that sandwich. So you either got to remove the bottom panel or you got to remove the top panel. You could just try to pry the whole cabinet right off the wall, but I don't usually recommend that because there's a good chance you're going to end up causing damage. And you don't want to put extra holes in the paneling if you don't have to. So
yeah. And during that process, do you have to be mindful of electric when you're pulling cabinets out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to use some common sense and know like, hey, here's where there's electric. If there is electric in a cabinet, like say there's a light mounted under it, yeah, you might want to pull that fuse for that. Or you're going to want to make sure that, when you disconnect the light fixture, that you're capping off the wires so you're not accidentally touching those and getting shocked or worse.
Yeah.
So.
Otherwise, we like to be really organized through the demo process as well. And any like screws that we plan on reusing, or if like for some reason we were keeping poles, we like to put those all in containers and label them so that it's an easy process to move them back into the RV.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll thank yourself, later on. The more organized you are about that, the better. And then also, if you're going to donate like all the poles to Restore or something like that, you have them all nice in a compartment. Here's all the screws, all the hinges, and it makes it real easy for them to make sure that they actually have a chance of getting, reused again by somebody else.
Yeah. And then, do you feel like it's hard to get like RV couches and furniture out?
So a lot of times furniture is put together inside of the RV, or maybe when the walls weren't all put together. So depending on the piece of furniture, you might have to disassemble it inside the RV to get it out the door. And then, of course, it's going to need reassembled on the other end. But you know, if you're just taking out banquettes and that sort of thing, again, there's a good chance that there's hidden screws. So just be patient as you're doing it. And if you're pulling on something and it's not giving, try to find out where that pressure point is and try to find that hidden screw and get to it so that you're not making, you know, causing more damage than you ought to when you're removing all those things.
Yeah. Or if there's a time that we're removing like a light or something that we plan on putting back in the RV down the road, I mean, that could be 8 weeks later, and by then you've forgotten how that whole system worked that you just took out. And so in times like that, we like to record ourselves on our cell phone and just like a little demonstration of like how it all went together, so that when it's time to put it back together, it's like, okay, this is how we did it, instead of trying to remember something from 2 months prior.
Do yourself favors, because there's only so much room, at least for me up here, to remember things. So
Because you're getting old.
Because I'm getting old, but also just because I've hit my head a lot, but just kidding. All right, here's our control. On the far right, there's orange on top and then a yellow that's jumpered to a yellow and reddish wire on the far left. The middle bottom is pink, the middle top is 2 whites, and the left top is brown. You definitely do yourself a favor. Label things, make yourself videos, make yourself notes. April mentioned the Notes app. That's an iOS thing on iPhones. I'm sure there's a version that's on Android, but it just it's as organized as you can be. The
So
better.
as messy as demo is, be organized with it.
Right. So we've cleared everything out. We've gotten all the stuff out that we don't want to use. We've gotten all the stuff out that we want to try to protect or, you know, get away from the walls. We generally leave all the cabinetry in that we're going to be reusing. We usually take off countertops. Most times we're replacing those. All the sinks come out. You know, if we're going to be removing walls or anything or rebuilding, you know, walls or slides or that sort of thing, we remove everything and get it down to bare bones at that point.
Remove the appliances for the most part, minus
So-
the refrigerator.
Right, refrigerator's usually a tough one to remove, but a gas stove, you can get little caps that you put on the plug on the gas supply that plugs it, so you can take it out safely. And if you are renovating in a cold climate, you can still run the heat, which is important. But yeah, sinks, stove, microwave, hood fan, all those things all come out. And so once you have it demoed, then it's time to really consider any kind of like building or wall treatments or any sort of thing that you're going to be doing along those lines.
Yeah, so that's kind of the point when we'll come in and put up, like, if we're doing shiplap or wainscoting or anything like that, we'll apply those those wall treatments so that when it comes time to paint, we're able to just paint everything all at once. And so let's kind of walk you guys through a bit how we do wall treatments as far as shiplap. So again, back to weight, you wouldn't want to use shiplap like what you bought at a store because that's going to be thick and heavy. And you can get away with it if you're doing like a small wall or something. But we like to make custom faux shiplap, and we do that by ripping down 1/4 inch like Luan board. And from there we apply it.
Yeah, so we cut it out of, basically it's plywood, and we rip it on a table saw and get it to whatever the width is. And what's nice about that too is, like, I like to not be locked into whatever the height is of the wall. So if you were to just buy shiplap from the store, you'd be locked into that, and you might have to you know, do some skinny boards here and there. If you do your math right, you can figure out how tall your wall is or how wide your wall is, and then backwards, you know, figure that out to figure out how wide your planks need to be. And so everything can be nice and clean and similar sized. And so we get those cut. From there, generally what we'll do is we'll use an adhesive like Loctite or liquid nails, and we'll get those placed on the wall, and then we'll use brad nails.
I believe we use 5/8 inch brad nails. So just like small brad nails, because again, you want to be mindful of what's in the wall.
And so you can obviously see outlets or light switches, things like that on the wall, and that's going to be a big you know, indicator that obviously there's some kind of wires running there. In most RV situations, the electric's going to run from the bottom down. So you can pretty much, you know, you can guarantee that there's probably something on that line. There are a few situations where it does run from the bottom up, but typically it runs from the bottom down, whereas in a house, it might run all the way across the wall. That's not at least our experience in RVs, and maybe that's just because there's far less outlets and far few things to plug into. But to be certain, again, I'd recommend getting a stud finder that has a wire or AC detector on it, and just try to find out where those things are. And then obviously be cognizant, if you're putting a treatment on a wall and the backside of that wall is the bathroom, make sure you know where the pipes are at. So typically you'll be able to see them. They should run straight down from whatever the faucet or spigot or shower is. So you should be able to figure out like, hey, where is that going? But you just want to be sure. Like April said, worst case you can use shorter nails, but you can also use that stud finder to find the studs so that you're getting those wall treatments anchored into the studs too, and that's going to be the best way to secure them.
And we know all this from experience because it certainly happened. I think once we finished a bathroom and we went to turn the lights back on and realized that we had hit one of the wires with a nail.
And so I had to open that whole wall back open, redo the electrical, get it all put back together, and it obviously added like a week or something to the process, and it was a lesson learned. And so now, because of that, we try to be super careful about what we're doing, and we recommend that you do also. If you are going to do any kind of wall treatments, that's where you would get those adhered, no matter what they are. We'd recommend always filling your nail holes and sanding anything that needed to be sanded. And then part of paint prep, which is really the next step here, but it also kind of bleeds into putting up any kind of those treatments or doing building, is to caulk, as many seams as possible. Because ideally, in a perfect world, especially if you're like a lot of renovators and painting everything light or white, you want to make as many of these lines disappear as possible. Because if you don't caulk and fill these lines, as soon as they're white or bright, you're going to see these dark lines that are really showing all the seams that are in the space. And so this is the point when you would take care of all that.
All right, so demo is done. Things are not looking as pretty as even when you bought the RV, which might have already been ugly to begin with, but now is a point where you're like, wow, a bomb just went off in my RV and this thing looks horrible.
I just threw away thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yes.
It's an awful feeling.
We've done this several times and the feeling doesn't get better, other than we know that it will be better, but it's still kind of gut-wrenching. There's always a point in a renovation when things don't look the way you found them and things kind of look worse before they get better. We are definitely at that stage in the renovation currently. But
what have we done?
But I know it will end up looking so beautiful and will all be worth it. Right, Derek? And now it's time to do the tedious process of paint prep.
So paint prep, this is a super important step, super duper important. Don't skip it. Don't try to cut corners. Don't ask on the internet if you really have to sand and prime. People will tell you what you want to hear, but the truth of the matter is that you need to take your time on this step. Otherwise, you're going to hate yourself down the road. So first things first, you got to wipe off any sort of adhesives that might be on the wall. If you literally took wallpaper borders off, if there were stickers on the wall, I don't know, somebody just got a bunch of grease somewhere, like you need to remove those things with the proper cleaner.
So a lot of people use, I think it's TSP, is that what it's called? We like to be a little bit more natural with our method, and so we just use like vinegar and water, warm water, and wipe everything down. Even besides the adhesive and things that Derek's talking about, it's just good to wipe all your walls down and start with them being clean, because there can be like bugs and just lots of gross things on the walls. And
if you go ahead and sand some of that stuff, it's just going to smear it all over, and it's going to ruin your sandpaper.
You say smear?
Smear. It's going to smear.
That's what I say
it's
too.
Going to smear the bugs. It's going to smear the adhesive, and it's going to be a problem. So you want to start with clean walls before you get them all dirty with sandpaper dust.
Yeah. So now you've washed the walls. Obviously, you're making sure that you're emptying out your water bucket and you're not just wiping dirty water onto your walls frequently. And now it's time to sand your walls.
Mm-hmm. And so depending on what the surface is, like I'll use a couple different sandpapers, the fine stuff 220, and the rougher stuff more like an 80 or 120. But the walls themselves, typically the units we've done are all kind of like a hard plywood, And what we're trying to do is just rough that up so that it'll grab primer and paint real well. And so we'll just go over them. You can hand sand the corners and that sort of thing, but otherwise I'll just use an orbital sander, go over the walls, get where I can get, make sure you get all the corners, that sort of thing. And so cabinetry is a little bit different approach. Like a lot of RV cabinets are built with not real wood, so they're kind of like an MDF material, and basically they have like a real thin, almost like paper coating over the top. You want to rough that up just a little bit to get rid of the real glossy, shiny surface, but it's a super duper fine line between roughing that up and cutting all the way through to that MDF-ish kind of core. And if you expose that, the second you get paint and primer on it, it's going to start to bubble up and balloon because it's absorbing that moisture. So it's a very fine act right there. You definitely don't probably want to use a very powerful hand sander or anything on your cabinet bases. The doors themselves we'll all remove during demo, and we'll label them so we literally know, like, this door was left top above sink, this drawer was number 2 in the kitchen. Whatever your process is, you want to label them so you get them back in the right spots. Doors are typically actually are made out of wood, so you can be a little bit more aggressive in the sanding process, but watch out on those cabinet bases unless you plan on rebuilding them. So very fine line there. And so we get everything sanded. We're going to wipe and vacuum everything down again after that to try to remove and get rid of as much dust as possible. And we're going to fill any kind of holes, nail holes, screw holes from where we took down cabinetry. And it's real hard to get them super perfect, especially on this paneling that's typically on the walls, but just do as good as you can. And you want to make all those kind of imperfections disappear as much as possible, because when you start painting everything white as opposed to a dark color or going lighter, some of those imperfections really start to pop out more than they did before.
Yeah, and then we also remove any like light switches or like the little LED lights that can be in RVs. We'll pull down and then put like a plastic bag around them or use tape so that when we're painting, because we spray, we're not getting overspray on any of those things. All right, so we plasticed everything off and of course put tape around the windows, plastic around our light fixtures, sealed off the stove and the refrigerator. Here's our slide. We put paper down so that we're not tracking, even though we're getting rid of these floors, that we were not stepping through paint and getting it everywhere. To rebuild this step, which makes it a little tricky for me to get up and down. Have all of our plumbing plasticed off so that we're not getting paint on all of that. And then that's back in the bedroom. Basically anything that you don't want paint on, you need to cover.
And paint prep is not like something that's like suited for like Instagram or anything like that. You're not going to probably get a lot of gratification out of it, but take your time again, make sure you do it and do it right, and you'll thank yourself for it down the road. And so
I feel like paint prep is my least favorite part. Is it one of yours?
Plumbing. I hate plumbing. Okay, so everything's prepped and now it's time to prime, and I would personally not recommend just using a paint and primer all in one, but you can certainly, do what you want in the end. But we'll look for a good bonding primer, something that's going to give you a very good shot at totally adhering to the walls and sticking and creating a solid subsurface for your paint to adhere to. So we've used a number of them over the years, some good, some bad, but as of late, we've been happy with Extreme Bond from Sherwin-Williams. When that's not available, there's a couple of other ones that we picked up, but you just want to find one that specifically is titled for bonding to hard to stick to surfaces, and make sure that you're being thorough about getting that on. So I know some people are fine with just one coat. A lot of times, like, I'll go back and spray what I also think might be trouble areas as 2 coats, and so that might be like insides of cabinets or places like that where I think that, again, walking that fine line between being able to sand them enough and not sand too much, you might not be able to sand them quite as much as would be totally perfect. So I hit them with a little extra primer so that hopefully that adheres and kind of makes that shield for the paint to adhere to.
So like we kind of touched on with the primer, we have, I guess, fallen in love with and stayed with Sherwin-Williams. There's a lot of other good brands out there as well. We use the Duration line of paint personally in all of our RVs. And then for the cabinetry, we use their Emerald line, which is a self-leveling paint.
Mm-hmm. So we've just found that these not only cure really well, they finish really well, and they spray. You know, again, we commented that, you know, nowadays they spray really well. So every paint can be different when it comes to those parameters.
So whether your method is to roll or spray, both work, and both will get the job done. We personally like spraying, but we can kind of walk you through the processes of both. So back in, I don't know, probably half the RVs that we've renovated, we did the old-fashioned roll and brush on.
So cut in all our corners, you know, that might be a step, and then roll it all in, and might be, depending on, especially if we were using not as high quality paint, it might be 3-4 coats to kind of get everything covered. And it took up a lot of time.
And there's a lot of tight little spaces like bunks and little nooks and crannies that you have to maneuver yourself into to paint.
And part of that time is not that it's just time that's it's taking, it's also time that you're exposed to those VOCs and all those chemicals that are in the paint and the primer. And so we really highly recommend investing in a good respirator, something that really seals off you from the environment and has good filtration on it, and making sure you take care of those filters and change them out regularly. You want to ultimately protect your lungs, and there's a lot of volatile, even if it's a no VOC paint, there's a lot of bad stuff in there. And so the less time that you're in the rig, especially when all that stuff is so prevalent in the air, you know, the healthier you're going to be. And so with spraying, it's not only going to make the job quicker, but it's going to, again, be less time that you're exposed in that situation, and hopefully keep you healthy. So when we brush and roll, it was the old technique of just cutting in all the corners and then rolling, you know, the big open walls. And of course the big open walls were the easy and quick part to do, but there's a lot of like little windows and nooks and crannies to cut around. When we got to the cabinet bases, you know, we would again just kind of brush and maybe back roll to try to get as smooth of a finish as possible, and use a really fine kind of finishing foam roller in order to achieve that. And then, like we mentioned, we took all of our cabinet doors out, and so we would just brush and roll those outside, you know, lay them flat, you know, let them sit and cure, flip them over, you know, roll the other side, let them sit and cure. And so that was really the process for us when we were rolling and brushing. And now that we spray, again, there's a little bit of extra paint prep, because you do have to cover those windows and all that stuff with plastic in order to avoid getting overspray on them. But, you know, we'll do the inside of the RV, and usually, you know, it's a coat or two. And then the cabinet doors, like I mentioned, when we take them off, we put little teacup hooks, usually on the bottom or the top side, depending on what sort of cabinet they are, because you want to hide those holes from your line of sight. And we hang those on a hanger. We set up a paint tent, put those in there. We're able to spray one side, rotate it around, spray the other side, carry it off, put it on the dryer rack, switch it. And it's a process we've just taken from the Idaho painter on YouTube, who does a lot of like kitchen cabinets, and it makes things really efficient and really quick for us, and it gets that finish that we were just never quite able to achieve with brushing and rolling.
Yeah, it's a really nice smooth finish, especially when you're using that self-leveling paint. And again, that process of hanging our cabinet doors, because we did initially just spray, and we would spray those like leaning against things and stuff, has just saved so much time, because now you're not waiting the dry time to spray the second side when you can flip it over. You're not risking flipping your cabinet over and it's still being tacky and getting dented up and things. So that has really been something that I would recommend to anyone to do.
And thin to win, for sure. Like, it's real easy to be like overzealous, and especially if you haven't sprayed a lot of things before, and you just want to coat that thing as much as possible. But there's a very fine line between getting a good layer of paint on there and it all just turning into a drippy mess, and having to get sanded down, and then you start some of the process over. So thin to win would be my tip.
And there's a lot of different paint sprayers out there, and I guess it kind of depends. If you're just renovating an RV for yourself and you never see yourself using a paint sprayer again, then I'm sure you could certainly go to like Menards or a home improvement store and buy a little bit more economical of a sprayer. But if it's something you plan on using for home projects or more renovations, we've had a lot of success and been really happy with some different Graco sprayers that we have.
So we have a little one that is handheld. It's a Graco 360 VSP, and so it just has variable speeds on it, is what the VSP part is. There's a model that doesn't have variable speeds. We actually own that one for a while too. And what's nice about that is it's easy to get out and use, and cleanup's a lot quicker. The negative to that one is that it just has a little cup that you put the paint in, and that runs out pretty frequently depending on how much you're painting. So you got to constantly be refilling that. And then the bigger unit we have is a Graco X7. And so we literally can put a 5-gallon bucket of paint underneath it. And, you know, we're never going to run out of paint essentially with the kinds of things that we're spraying. The downside to that one is that cleanup is a lot more tedious. It's very effective and quick at taking care of larger areas, or I'll even use it on the cabinet doors if you know, if we're going to be doing a whole bunch of them all at once.
Yeah, and it's really a pretty quick process. I would say the RV that we're in right now is a 30-foot RV, and I would say that Derek sprayed like each coat maybe only took him like an hour.
And if you're spraying, you're going to want to do like your base coat first. So in here you can see, in this angle, you can see there's a couple different colors. But so we sprayed everything white, and then we covered areas near what we were going to come back and spray this accent color, this umber gray. So some of it was sprayed in a couple different phases.
And that's where that smaller sprayer can come in handy when you're doing more of like your accent colors. And of course you could just spray everything white, and if you had an accent color and you were more comfortable with it, you could certainly just have that be the color that you roll on.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's painting. And painting, if you're going to be doing a full RV renovation, is probably 80% of the time and the work, and it's going to really make a huge impact, the biggest impact probably in the entire renovation.
And then from there, we usually jump on to flooring.
Flooring, yeah. So you definitely, if you're going to be replacing your flooring, this is when you would do it. If even if you weren't replacing your flooring, I'd recommend putting down paper if you are going to spray in your RV, just to kind of absorb some of that overspray, because you can get into a tricky situation where it starts to accumulate on the linoleum, and it gets really slippery and it doesn't dry as quick as it would dry like on the walls and stuff. So that's just another little tip. So flooring, we would highly recommend that you look at either replacing with a similar linoleum product or an LVP product.
Yeah, LVP is waterproof and very durable, but certainly research that and decide what's kind of best for you and your family and your environment or climate.
And again, you want to make considerations for weight. There's different thicknesses of the flooring.
Usually we recommend sticking to smaller, or at the max like a 3 to 5 millimeter thickness for LVP. For one, it needs to be thin enough so that door thresholds and things still shut in your RV. If it's thicker, then they won't. But then also, obviously, largely, you need to worry about the weight of the flooring.
And if you have slides, you want to make sure there's a couple different ways that slides can function. But again, like April said, with the door thresholds, you want to make sure your slide's not coming in and scratching up the floor. We actually experienced that one in this rig, and I had to rip up a bunch of flooring that I'd put in and replace it, because I just didn't think about it, and I didn't put felt pads under the slides before I brought them in the first time. It was kind of a long day and a late night, and just brought them in, and when I came out the next morning, the floor was scratched from that. So if you do have slides, make sure that you have, depending on how they function and how they go in and out, make sure that you have enough room there between your new flooring.
Otherwise, like Derek kind of touched on, you can put big, like almost like 5x7, I would say, felt pads kind of like up and under in several places, and so when they come in, they're just sliding nicely on the felt.
And so we put in all our flooring, and then from there, just like with any flooring, like in a residential situation, like you're probably gonna have to think about doing some trim around the walls, and to one, hide the gap, and two, to kind of hold that flooring down so it doesn't start popping up and shifting. So that really depends on the style that you're going for. We like to kind of do a lot of like farmhousey kind of stuff right now, so we look for some thicker 4, 5, 6 inch trim boards depending on what we're doing, and then we try to keep those as thin and lightweight as possible again. So
all right, so your flooring's done. Now it's time to move on to some other fun things like electrical and plumbing.
So if you had to make any big electrical changes, obviously you would have took care of that back in the building phase. And so if you needed to move anything or add any additional receptacles, you would have did all that before you closed the walls back up and painted. But if now what you're doing is just adding in, maybe you're upgrading outlets to have a USB plug, or you're putting in some residential lighting, this is the time when we generally put all those sorts of items in.
A lot of people will ask if they can put residential lighting in their RV, and you absolutely can. You just need to make sure a lot of times to put in a switch if there's not already one on the light. And then you also need to make sure you're using a 12-volt light bulb in the residential lighting.
Yeah, without getting too much in the weeds, there's two different electrical systems on your RV. And so one is a 110 volt like house system like you'd have in your house. And that is going to come if you're plugged in to either a generator or to shore power. That's things like outlets and some of the major appliances and stuff like that will run off of that. But the other source of electricity is 12 volt, and it's your battery system. And so basically, I think all the lights in the RV always are 12 volt. Most of the items that are in an RV are 12 volt. And so that's just, it's a little bit different technology, electricity wise. So that's where April mentioned, you got to make sure you have that 12 volt light bulb, because you can hook up your light exactly how it's supposed to be hooked up, put in a regular light bulb like from your house, and it won't work. And you'll be left wondering like, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? It might just be the light bulb. And they don't just like commonly stock a whole assortment of these at home improvement stores. You probably have to jump online. And
you can
order
find them at Amazon, and you can actually find them in our Amazon shopping cart too if you're confused, or obviously feel free to reach out to with any questions. So now you've updated and put in some custom lighting, done any kind of like electrical. Now it's time to put in things like if you've ordered a new sink or a new faucet, and of course Derek's favorite job of plumbing.
So this is assuming you've already either kept the countertops that you have, or you've created or purchased new countertops to install, but you're going to put those sinks in. Usually it's pretty straightforward to figure out how the drains hook up and the faucets, but you have to generally get some sort of conversion piece, because all the water supply in an RV is 1/2-inch PEX. And so a lot of times what you're going to have to do is get a conversion that goes from 1/2-inch PEX to that compression fitting, which is going to come along with your faucet. And once you have that and you get that put together tightly and hooked up, you shouldn't have any sort of issues.
Derek's learned this all the hard way. I remember the first RV that we kind of told you guys about that we did during the pandemic. I felt like it was pretty much done. I think all that Derek really had left was like plumbing. And I think it was even Mother's Day. It was like this rainy day, and I'm walking out to the RV to see what he's up to. I open the door and like I can hear water. Well, it's probably the rain that's going on outside. No, it was literally water in the RV, like coming out of the pipe under the kitchen, and he's like mopping it up with towels, and it was a very stressful situation.
Yeah, so it's just, I didn't have a big plumbing background before I started doing this, with a lot of these things. This has been a big giant learning experience for us, but just figuring out like the right fittings was like a pretty big tall task too, because it was during the pandemic and we weren't going into a lot of stores, and most of the people that I would get on the phone didn't really understand what we were trying to do. So we went through a series of like wrong fittings before we landed on the right ones. But it's just, just figuring out, and again, taking your time, making sure things are tight, using the right products if you need to seal up the threads. And then the other thing is just being able to maneuver in some of these spaces can be tricky, because most of the RVs don't have like a real easy access way to get in under the sink. A lot of times you got to contort yourself and squeeze in there, or send your small child in there. I don't know. But you gotta figure out a way to get underneath and hook these things up, or just be smart enough to figure out a way to hook them up before you put it all together, I guess. So, And then at this point too, if there's anything else that you need to put back together or bring back into the RV, you're in the home stretch. So if you were just bringing the couch back in, you'd get that in here. If you got a new couch, you'd bring it in, usually assemble it inside the RV, because again, the doors are kind of small. You got to be cognizant of the fact that you might not be able to get a fully assembled piece of furniture through the door because they are so tight. But you get everything in here, get it put all together. This is when April usually starts bringing in all the pretty things.
The throw pillows and the fake plants, which are Derek's favorite. It's time to make all your hard work kind of come to a reality, I guess, and make your vision come full circle.
Wow, that sounds dreamy. You also got to make sure with all of this kind of like home decor stuff that you're thinking about either how it's going to be secured to the wall. So like mirrors, pictures, those sorts of things. You can't generally just hang on a hook and leave it there and travel down the road. It's going to bounce off and break other things. So you either have to have a plan of taking them down, or maybe use command strips with Velcro, or put an extra screw into it if you can. Just some way to make sure that it stays on the wall.
Yeah.
And then all the little knickknacks and decorative stuff too. You just need to have a plan of how are you going to functionally travel. And so I think that's really like our next tip here. You have the renovation done. You just need to make sure that you can functionally get from home to a campsite.
Yeah, with that, one of those initial renovations that we did for ourselves when we took our kids to Yellowstone, I remember, I don't even think we were that far down the road probably. And we stopped to get gas and have the kids go to the bathroom, and we, opened up the RV and looked in, and like the couch was like clear across the RV, and stuff was kind of all over. I mean, we knew that you were supposed to pack things up, which we certainly did, but we hadn't thought about securing the couch in. And so every time we stopped during that trip, it was always like, okay, move the couch back to where it goes. And so I think you want to be conscious of that and have a plan.
Yeah, so what I found that I like is to use like gate hooks. If you can attach, discreetly attach it to a piece of furniture and attach it to the wall. Again, making sure you're getting into, a stud, so it's very secure. You can kind of clip those things in so that they're not going to move drastically when you're driving. But if you did want to move them for some reason, you can unclip them really easily, slide them away from the wall, whatever you got to do. But it's just, you got to have a plan, because if it's not screwed in, it's going to probably move on you.
So now everything's secured, everything's finished up, and now it's time to go on your adventures. RV renovation is fun, but difficult. There's a lot of steps to it, and it's certainly a process. It doesn't need to be as difficult as what we kind of just went over. It can also be as simple as just painting the walls and doing it in stages and steps as well, or room by room, certainly, as well as budget and time allows.
So yeah, so whether it's a partial renovation or a full renovation, just tackle it head on, and don't be afraid just because maybe you're not an expert at something or haven't done something before. Don't be afraid to take it on. There's plenty of amazing videos on YouTube, in different forums, online or in Facebook. There's always people willing to help and share their experiences. And it really can be just a great way, especially if you're not doing this for business and you're doing it for personal, to learn and to just do new things, get out of your comfort zone, express some creativity. And in the end, you'll be kind of like we are right now. We're sitting, I guess, in a finished project that took us a few months, and it feels amazing to look around and see everything completed. And it's a real sense of accomplishment, and that's something that you can bring to yourself. But you got to know that it's going to be a lot of hard work. You got to be realistic about the amount of time and energy that you're willing to stick into it. But if you can commit to those two things, just go full force forward, and know that there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but you got to keep that finish line, in your head. And just keep trudging along. You'll get there.
And if for some reason it does all feel overwhelming, or you get started and it's too much, there are certainly a lot of great RV renovators out there that can do the project for you as well.
So if you think you're up for the task, time-wise and effort-wise, we definitely recommend going at it.
Let us know if you have any questions. You can find us on our website at newlookrvrenovation.com. You can, of course, follow us over on Facebook and Instagram, also New Look RV Renovation. We also have a podcast where we talk to a lot of great RV renovators and people in the know about RV renovation.
We'll see you next time.
Good luck with everything, guys.